Bismillah ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. As-salatu wa-salamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Amma ba'd. Su'alu. توضأت ولم أذكر أنني لم أسمي إلا بعد الفراغ من غسل اليدين وكلما ذكرت أعدته مرة أخرى فما حكم ذلك؟ الجواب: قد ذهب جمهور أهل العلم إلى صحة الوضوء بدون تسمية، وذهب بعض أهل العلم إلى وجوب التسمية مع العلم والذكر لما روي عنه صلى الله عليه وسلم أنه قال: لا وضوء لمن لم يذكر اسم الله عليه، ولكن من تركها ناسيا أو جاهلا فوضوءه صحيح وليس عليه إعادته ولو قلنا بوجوب التسمية لأنه معذور بالجهل والنسيان. والحجة في ذلك قوله تعالى: ربنا لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا أو أخطأنا. وقد صح عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أن الله سبحانه قد استجاب هذا الدعاء. أما الختان فهو من سنن إلى آخره. So the question says, what is the ruling on someone who performs wudu and they forgot to say Bismillah? They wanted to say Bismillah, but they forgot to, whether they believed that they had to or they should, but they forgot. What's the ruling on that? Person says, I made wudu and I didn't remember to say Bismillah until after I finished washing my hands. And whenever I remembered, I would start over. What's the ruling on this? Answer says, most of the ulama, the majority of the fuqaha, they hold the view that wudu is valid without saying Bismillah. Most of the schools say that if you don't say Bismillah, the wudu is still valid. And of course, there's some of the ulama who say that saying Bismillah is a must. One must do it in wudu. But it says here, ma'al ilmi wa dhikri. Knowledge of that ruling and you remembering. I.e., those who say that it's obligatory, if a person was ignorant of it being obligatory, they say that wudu will be valid. And if a person believed it was obligatory, they knew it was obligatory, but they forgot, it would still be valid. So the first group says, no sin, no problem. Intentionally, unintentionally, it doesn't matter. And the second group, those who say that you have to make the tasmiyah, you have to say Bismillah only with knowledge of it and you remembering it. And as far as if you forgot to say it, then the wudu would be valid. They base this opinion, the second view, the latter view, also off of a hadith that's mentioned. It's ruya. It's a sound. What's important is a hadith that's mentioned. La wudu'a. There's no wudu for the one who doesn't mention Allah's name. There's no wudu for one who doesn't mention Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's name. However, the one who forgets to say Bismillah, or he was ignorant that he had to say Bismillah, then the wudu is sound, and he does not have to make the wudu up. He doesn't have to make it up. And that is because he is pardoned. He has an excuse for his ignorance and or his forgetfulness. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, رَبَّنَا لَا تُؤَخِذْنَا إِن نَسِينَا أَوْ أَخْطَأْنَا. The believers say, Oh Allah, punish us not if we forget and if we make a mistake. Oh Allah, don't hold us accountable if we forget. And don't hold us accountable, please, oh Allah, if we made a mistake, if it was a slip, if it was a mistake, an error. And it's been authentically reported from the Prophet ﷺ that Allah, the Sublime, the Exalted, answered this dua. قَدْ فَعَلْتُ. قَدْ فَعَلْتُ. I will do this. Okay, with regards to the last verses of Surah Al-Baqarah, and that very intimate discussion and dialogue, that prayer, that supplication that the believers make, and the things that they ask Allah for, and how those last verses begin, or it starts off, Allah talks about how if you reveal or if you conceal, Allah will bring you to account. Allah will hold you accountable whether you do it or whether you don't do it. And what the Sahaba said and how they felt in the beginning, how that was difficult and burdensome. And the Prophet ﷺ asked them, we would like to say like the Hebrews and Israelites said, will you hear and disobey and turn away? Or will you just take it and submit? And they did that, they said that, and then Allah Azza wa Jalla, He sent down the other verses. That Allah doesn't burden a soul more than a soul can bear, etc., etc., etc. Right? That's a long discussion in itself, the virtue of those last verses from Surah Al-Baqarah. This fatwa is given by Sheikh Abdul Aziz Ibn Baz, rahimahullah ta'ala. And it's very important for us to understand. All of the scholars unanimously agree on the virtue and the importance of saying Bismillah before you make wudu. And they only differ and disagree on is it an absolute must. But they're not differing and disagreeing that you should do it. It's a good thing to do, saying Allah's name before you do any act of goodness. But do you have to do it? Different story. Similar to covering the face and the hands. Many ignorant people today, unfortunately, they have taken that a woman doesn't have to cover her hands and face in front of a non-mahram as she shouldn't. And that a woman doesn't have to cover her face and hands in front of a non-mahram, that it's a bad thing. And it's extremism. And that is pure ignorance. Pure ignorance. But the scholars only differed, is it a must for her to cover her hands and face in front of a non-mahram. They never ever differed that it's the best thing to do and a good thing to do. Alright? So many people have many misunderstandings of these rulings. A must versus you should, but it isn't a must. Okay? And also the different dynamics of remembering and forgetting. And how something which is obligatory you could be possibly excused from if you forget. Like saying Allah's name when you slaughter. Is it a shart لصحة التذكية ولا واجب؟ الواجب يسقط مع النسيان. أما الشرط لا يسقط مع النسيان. If it's a prerequisite of the slaughter, then you got to do it again. Versus not a prerequisite, but it's just obligatory. And if you happen to have forgotten, you move forward. Everyone understand the difference? These different dynamics are very, very, very helpful for a 9 to 5 Muslim to understand well. Alright? And of course, you can also look at the fatwa, the danger and the fear of the wiswas. Making the wudu again, because that's dangerous. It's very dangerous. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala surely knows best. And with him is all success.